in a
Okay, so as far as the PPP loan, I think I'm not sure if it was you. I spoke to so many people. I heard something about if you make an acquisition right now and a company has, they got a PPP loan. How does that affect us, and are we able to get like PPP forgiveness for that as a new buyer?
I think you did talk to me about that. So, yeah, and this was long-awaited guidance. It was issued October 1, and if you check out my LinkedIn page, I even have it posted there, the guidance that was issued on October 1st. And it was long-awaited. People were just bumping around in the dark, not knowing what to do when there was an outstanding PPP loan on deals. They just didn't know what are you supposed to do with that? Do you have to pay it off? What happens? So what the guidance says, I mean, just to crystallize it, is that if the loan is unforgiven, obviously if it's forgiven, nobody cares anymore, but if it's unforgiven, it has to be applied for. Forgiveness has to be applied for, and then you are allowed to escrow a portion of the seller proceeds with the lender. And then at the moment that the SBA forgives the loan, that lender can release those proceeds from escrow to the seller.
Wait, so you're saying a portion of the aggregate amount that the seller would get goes into escrow?
Exactly, exactly. And there it sits until the SBA has time to forgive it. Or if they don't forgive it, well then the seller never sees the money, of course. But as long as they do forgive it, let me turn off my
Why wouldn't the SBA forgive it though, as a new buyer?
no, it all depends on Oldco. So in other words, did Oldco spend it on qualifying things? Did they do the right things? It'll all be Oldco, and none of that comes to you. So you buy the company, that loan remains with Oldco, and it's their bet whether it's forgiven or not, and as it should be.
So,
I mean, you shouldn't be concerned about that as a buyer.
but even if it's a would it matter if it's a stock purchase versus? Well, I don't do stock purchases, but asset purchase, would we still be liable for
No.
that?
Here's the thing, and I've looked into the guidance on PPP too, just to see, and it doesn't even address that yet. But the old PPP guidance, which I can forward you, did indicate that it's either stock or asset, doesn't matter. So, I mean, there are somewhat different criteria. I mean, actually, if it's under a 50% asset deal, it doesn't even require the escrow. So, in other words, there are exceptions, based on deal structure. But the general rule is that the loan is the responsibility of the seller, as it should be. I mean, they took out the loan. As you know, any deal that you close, the seller is responsible for that debt, and generally it's not assumed by you guys, when you buy. So that debt, it remains with the seller. But here's what used to happen. What used to happen is people didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know if they had to pay it off. They didn't know if they blew the forgiveness. They didn't know what to do. I mean, it was impairing transactions. But as I said, now there's this method where they have to escrow, and then they deal with it after post-close. I mean, now here's a wrinkle though. If you're using an SBA7a loan, here's a bad wrinkle for you to keep in mind. They consider it double dipping if those proceeds are escrowed for the PPP. Believe it or not. So in other words,
What do you mean? Wait,
so in other words, if you're taking out an SBA7a, the SBA will not allow you to escrow those proceeds to pay off the seller's PPP loan. They won't allow that. So it's a weird rule, but in other words, they're trying to prevent people from borrowing from the SBA to indirectly get the funds they need for this loan for the forgiveness of this loan. They perceive a conflict there. A little far-fetched in my mind, but that's what they perceive. It's just you have to be careful with that. If you're doing a
How do we get around that though?
well, I guess you have to bring in enough fresh capital to cover their PPP and escrow. I believe that's how it would be done. So as long as you're bringing in enough equity yourself or from other sources to cover that PPP escrow, I think you'd be able to proceed. It's only that you can't touch those 7A loan proceeds. You can't use those. You can't apply those against the seller's PPP loan escrow. So
That's kind of weird. That's kind of weird since we're not. If it's an asset sale, well, it doesn't matter if it's an asset sale. You said, right?
no, and I'll send you the guidance. As I said, I also posted it. It's only 5 pages long.